The morning air in the settlement plaza carried a sweetness Tigo had no name for, a scent that lived in the same register as copal, as marigold, as the hot stone smell of grinding corn, a scent that meant ceremony is beginning, attend now. The settlement's builders had placed this open space where two paths of white stone converged beneath a canopy of broad-leafed growth that performed the functions of both tree and vine with an architectural precision that reminded him of the temple gardens of Tenochtitlan. The leaves filtered the system's pale star into bands of warm gold across the stone seating. It was a place designed for listening. He knew this because he had built places like this, the Quickakali, the house of song, where the young warriors were taught the old words, had the same proportional logic, a space shaped so that the speaker's voice could reach every ear without strain, where the listener's body was supported but not comfortable enough to sleep. The settlement builders had been doing this for a very long time. Tigo chose his position carefully. Third row of seating, offset left from center, his back against a stone column worn smooth by what could only be generations of other backs. From here he could see Aisha's face in profile as she translated and Sale's full form as she spoke. He could also see the rest of the group arranged in their characteristic pattern, the Roman-centered, the Northmen at the perimeter where he could reach the exit, the strategist elevated and behind, the tracker to one side where she had sight lines in three directions, and Decca had chosen the seat closest to Aisha, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees, her fingers laced together in the way Tigo had come to recognize as I am, thinking faster than the words are arriving. 3 ivory akron had settled at the plaza's edge. Their crests were low, their triple-jointed legs folded beneath them in a compact rest posture that Tigo associated with focused listening. The youngest of the three, the one who had been declining on the ship, whose scales now carried a renewed iridescence, kept turning its segmented eyes towards Sale with recognition, as if it had heard some version of this before, or its species memory held the shape of it. Hazael stood at the convergence of the two white paths. She was speaking in the language she shared with Asha, the archaic Romani that predated living memory, the one that made Asha's eyes go sharp and still when she heard it. Sale's voice carried effortlessly in the shaped acoustic of the plaza, low and unhurried, the cadence of someone who had told this account more than once across what Tigo suspected was a span of time he did not have numbers for. Aisha translated. She translated in the careful way Tigo had seen her work aboard the ship, absorbing a passage, turning it in her mind, then releasing it in the combined words they all shared, with occasional detours into gesture, and the tonal shorthand she had built with each of them over the weeks of confinement and escape and slow, hard travel. When she reached a concept that had no clean combine equivalent, she paused, looked at Sale, and they exchanged a brief negotiation in the old tongue before Aisha found the bridge. Tigo listened. Sale said, "The species that calls itself human did not originate on the world it remembers as home." The combined word Aisha used was origin place, the cargo manifest term for a specimen's collection point. Tigo understood the word. He also understood it was wrong, too small. Origin place was a location on the shipping form. What Sale was describing was a creation. Sale said approximately 400,000 years before the present, a transplanting event occurred. A single event, a deliberate and singular act of placement. A founding population of the human species was placed on the world. The Combine's records designate Tier 7, the world Tigo's people called Tila-Tikpak. The world Decca's people called Earth, the world that had many names and many mouths and was always the same world. Ayosha's voice was even and careful. Her hands were steady, but Tigo could see the tension in her jaw, the way she was holding her body very still as the words came through her, because translating something that rewrites the world requires the translator to sit inside the rewriting without letting it shake the work. Sale said the civilization that performed the transplanting did not survive the process. The civilization was already ending. The transplanting was among its final acts. What remained afterward was a function, a monitoring capability set in place before the collapse, designed to persist, to watch. to maintain the conditions under which the transplanted population could develop. The keepers, Aisha said, using the name Sale had given her 3 days ago. Sale inclined her head. Sale said the Combine is a later development. It arose in the vacuum left by the collapsed civilization, as opportunistic structures tend to do when old orders end and the territory they held becomes available. The Combine did not create the conditions of the galaxy. It filled a space that had been emptied. The Keepers predate the Combine by a span of time the Combine has no institutional memory of. The Combine does not know the Keepers exist. Tigo closed his eyes. The closing of the eyes was the posture of receiving. When the Tlameti Nime, the wise ones, the teachers of the Kamikak, spoke the histories of the eras, the student's duty was to receive with the full body, and the eyes were a distraction from the deep listening. You closed them so that the words could arrive without the interference of light. He heard the wind in the broad-leafed canopy above the plaza. He heard the two-note call of the settlement's insects, or whatever they were, beginning their daytime cycle, trading the sound like sentries on a wall. He heard Aisha's breathing, the catch between sentences where she was absorbing the next passage from Sale's low, unhurried voice. He heard the shape of what was being said. It was familiar. The 5 sons, Nahui Osalo, the first son, the son of the jaguar. It ended when the jaguars ate the world. Nahai Katul, the second son, the son of wind. It ended when the wind tore everything apart. Nahai Kaya Haitul, the third son, the son of rain. It ended in fire that fell from the sky. Nahai Kaya Haitul, the fourth son, the son of water. It ended in flood. Nahui Olin, the fifth son, the current era, begun by sacrifice. The gods gathered at Teotihuacan, and one of them leapt into the fire to become the sun, and another followed to become the moon, and the world was remade from the bones of what came before. The fifth son is sustained by the continuing payment of what existence costs. It will end in earthquakes, but it has not ended yet. Tigo had learned the 5 sons the way he had learned his own name, before he had the capacity to question it in the rhythm of his mother's voice and the ordered instruction of the temple school. The 5 sons were not stories. They were the structure of reality. Each era ended. Each ending was catastrophic. Humanity survived through the transitions, changed but continuous. The current world was built from the wreckage of the ones before it. He had always believed this, not metaphorically, not as poetry. He believed it the way he believed that his lungs drew breath, as a description of how reality was organized. The 5 sons were the architecture of time. The sacrifices that sustained the 5th son were the mechanism by which the world continued. The priests who performed them were engineers of continuity, doing the precise and terrible work that kept the era from ending. This belief had survived everything. It had survived being taken from the flower war field in a flash of light that was nothing his cosmology had prepared him for. It had survived the cell, the alien ship, the silence where the temple drum should have been. It had survived the Combine's indifference and the discovery that the sky held more worlds than he had imagined, and none of them were Tenochtitlan. It had survived the slow education of living alongside people from eras and lands he had never known existed, the Roman with his dry iron discipline, the Northman with his hammer-weight greed, the young woman from the future who knew what his civilization had become and carried the knowledge carefully. Like a wound she was afraid to show him. His cosmology had survived because it was structural. The 5 sons did not depend on the temple drum. They did not depend on Tenochtitlan. They described how the world was made, and the world remained made, regardless of which room he was standing in. And now Sal was telling them that humans had been placed on their world by a dying civilization approximately 400,000 years ago. 4 previous eras, each ending in catastrophe. The current era begun by an act of creation from the remains of what came before. Tigo kept his eyes closed. His hands rested on his thighs, palms down, the way they rested during the receiving of a history. Autismo entai, He said to softly to himself, to the stone beneath him and the air around him and the 5 suns that had been keeping accurate time long before anyone in this plaza had drawn breath. We said this. Aisha heard him. Tigo could tell because her translation paused, a half-beat, the hesitation of Aisha reading the room before deciding what to carry forward. He opened his eyes. She was looking at him, not with surprise, with the focused attention Aisha brought to moments when she recognized that something was happening inside a person that she needed to honor before she could continue. Her dark eyes held the question without asking it aloud. Tadaiga sat forward. He drew breath. He found the combined words, the cargo manifest tongue that reduced everything to inventory and compliance, the language that had no word for sacred but could express my people's record through a clumsy assembly of origin, group, and account and shape. My people said this, he said. His voice was steady. Not exactly, but the shape of it. Fuentes, centered and still, shifted his attention to Tiago with the economy of a man who had spent decades in formation. No unnecessary movement, full focus. Sevihel, at the perimeter, turned his broad head. Akla's gaze moved to Tigo and stayed. Dika's laced fingers tightened. Hattori, above and behind, was already watching. He had been watching Tigo since Aisha began translating. The strategist had the unsettling habit of knowing where the significant response would come from before it arrived. Aisha looked at Sale. A brief exchange in the old tongue, Aisha explaining what Tigo had said, or asking permission, or both. Sale's expression did not change, but her posture opened, a settling of the shoulders, a slight forward inclination, the posture of someone prepared to listen. Tell her, Aisha said to Tigo. If you want to, she is listening. He told her in the combined words, supplemented by gesture, speaking slowly so Aisha could carry his meaning across the linguistic gap into Sale's archaic tongue. He used his hands the way he always used them when he spoke of things that had structure, the same motion Decca had once observed when he was describing the preparation of maize, the grinding and the soaking, and the transformative chemistry that turned raw grain into something a body could use. His hands moved because the things he was describing had shape, and the shape existed in space, and his body knew where it was. The 5 suns, he explained. The first sun, the son of jaguars, the era that ended in devouring. He explained the second, the son of wind, the era that ended in disillusion. The third, the son of fire rain, and the fourth, the son of flood. He explained each ending as a structural event. The cosmos was not angry, it was reorganizing. Each era contained the conditions that would produce the next era, and the transition between them was catastrophic in the way that birth was catastrophic, a tearing open that preceded the new form. He explained the 5th sun, Nahui Olin, the son of movement, of earthquakes, begun at Teotihuacan, where the gods gathered and asked which of them would become the new sun. Nanahuatzin, the sick god, the poor god, the one who had nothing to offer but himself. He leapt into the fire. He became the sun, but the sun would not move without payment. The other gods gave their blood. The sun moved. The world began. The 5th sun was not a gift. It was a transaction. The world continued because the cost of its continuation was met. The priests of his people understood this. The sacrifices, the ones that made the woman from the future look at him with her complicated, careful, wounded expression, were not cruelty. They were the installment payment on existence. You did not stop paying because payment was hard. You stopped paying when the era ended, and by then it was too late. He spoke steadily, without apology, without the defensive posture of a man explaining something he expected to be dismissed. He was pointing at the structure, 4 previous eras, each ending in catastrophe. The current era begun by an act of creation involving sacrifice, humanity surviving through the transitions. Sale had just told them that humans had been placed on their world by a dying civilization, that the civilization was gone. that the keepers remained as the monitoring function of something older than the combine, that the transplanting was a single event, an act of creation from the wreckage of what came before. When he finished, the plaza was very quiet. The settlement's canopy insects had paused their two-note exchange, as if the acoustic of the plaza had told them something large was being held in its shaped air. Sale spoke. Aisha translated, "Your people's account of the fifth sun is the most accurate human record of what was done to your species." Tigo received it. He received it with his hands still, his back against the worn stone column, his eyes on Sale's face. She was not smiling. She was not offering comfort or congratulation. She was delivering a factual assessment with the same unhurried precision she had used for everything else. Your record was accurate. Other records were less accurate. This is what I am telling you. The plaza held the weight of it. The sun is still the sun, he thought. The fifth era is the era I am in. The God who made us did not look like what we pictured. That is always true of gods. What we picture is our capacity to picture, not their shape. We were seeing something real. We were seeing it from inside it, without the vocabulary of what it was. He was not destroyed by this. The confirmation that the five suns described a literal event, the transplanting of humans to their world, landed in him as reorientation. A shift in the angle of seeing, like the moment when you are high on the temple steps and the sun clears the eastern ridge and the shadow of the pyramid moves and you see the whole valley as a single design thing, not a collection of separate places. The cosmos survived the confirmation. Of course it did. A cosmology that had survived 400,000 years of oral transmission, imprecise, adapted, translated through every language his ancestors had spoken, was not a fragile thing. It was bedrock. You could pour new understanding on the bedrock, and the bedrock held. The new understanding found its place in the structure, and the structure accommodated it, because that was what structures that lasted did. I have spent my whole life inside a cosmology that describes something true without knowing it. This does not mean the cosmology was wrong. It means it was right in the way that all accurate records are right. They record the shape of what happened, not the mechanism. I am still inside the fifth sun. I am now outside the settlement of my birth, on a ship I took from a machine, speaking to someone who was watching my ancestors. The fifth and the sun is a stranger era than I thought. It is still my era. The Northman was watching him from the perimeter. His Sepham face held something Tigo recognized, the expression of one man watching another man absorb a blow that would have broken a lesser structure, and seeing that the structure held. Save Hill gave a nod, just that, the acknowledgement of weight born. Quintus had his hand on the iron ring he wore. The Roman did this when he was processing something that connected to his own deep past. Tigo had noticed the gesture aboard the ship during the long watches. Quintus's face was still as worked stone, but his thumb moved against the ring in slow circuits. Hattori had not moved at all. That was his tell. When the strategist went perfectly still, he was mapping something new into the structure of what he already knew. Pakla had her eyes on the canopy, tracking the movement of the leaves as if reading weather. Her stillness was different from Hattori's. She had already absorbed the information and was now watching the terrain change around it. Then Deka stood up. Tigo watched her rise. She moved with the precise, controlled energy he had come to associate with her particular form of anger, structural, cold, patient, the anger of someone who had identified a system operating on her without her knowledge. He had seen the same quality in her aboard the ship when she had discovered that the Combine had been feeding them at 80% of what their bodies needed, calibrated to suppress resistance by exactly 31%. She had not shouted, she had not cursed, she had gone quiet, and then she had fixed it, and the fixing had been more frightening than any shout because it was precise. She was quiet now, standing, her hands loose at her sides, her weight balanced the way it balanced when she was about to say something she had been assembling for the entire duration of the conversation. Tigo recognized what was about to happen. Dika was going to ask the question he had not asked because he was oriented to the information differently. Tigo had heard the shape of the transplanting and recognized his cosmology in it. The shape was enough. The shape was in fact the primary thing. Why the gods had made the fifth son was a question that Tlemetni Blesma addressed in the deeper teachings, and the answer was always the same, because the previous son had ended and something had to come next. The purpose was continuation. The mechanism was sacrifice. The result was the world. Dika did not have that framework. Dika had a different one, the framework of a woman who had spent her life identifying structures that operated on people without their consent, who diagnosed systems the way a healer diagnosed illness, by symptoms and vectors, and the question who benefits from this arrangement. She looked at Sale. What was the purpose? Denied that. Her voice was level. Clean. The combined words she chose were function intent, a logistics term, the kind of word that appeared in cargo manifest next to weight and destination. Why transplant humans? The question landed in the plaza like a stone dropped into still water. Ethan Tua felt it ripple outward through the group, through Aisha's stillness, through the slight shift in Quintus's posture, through the way Hattori's eyes moved fractionally to Sale's face. The Ikran at the edge of the plaza had gone very still. The youngest one's crest had risen, a slow unfurling of iridescent tissue that Tico had learned to associate with heightened attention. The air around the three of them felt thicker, charged. The third channel, the one Tico could sense but not decode, was active. Sale did not answer immediately. She regarded Decca with an expression Tico could not fully read, because Sale's face operated on a timescale different from theirs. Her expressions moved the way geological features moved, slowly, with enormous weight, arriving at their final form only after the observer had already begun to look away. Tigo watched her face and thought, this is a person who has had this conversation before, many times. She knows where the question comes, and she knows where the answer leads, and she has decided where to stop. That is the correct question, Saul said. Aisha translated. Her voice was very careful. Saul continued, and Aisha carried it across. I am not yet ready to answer it. Decca's jaw tightened. Just that, a flex of muscle beneath brown skin, the visible effort of accepting a boundary she had not agreed to. Tigo watched her weigh the options, push or wait. Dika was not impulsive. Her anger was patient. It could hold a shape for weeks and arrive at the correct moment with the force of something that had been gathering mass the entire time. She sat down. The plaza exhaled. Not literally, the canopy insects resumed their two-note calls. The filtered light continued its slow migration across the white stone. The broad leaves shifted in air that had not actually been holding its breath. But the felt quality of the space changed, the way a room changes after a door has been opened and then closed again without anyone passing through. The group dispersed, not all at once, in the gradual way a formation dissolves when no one gives the order to fall out, but everyone understands the work is done for now. Quintus exchanged a look with Hattori that was worth several sentences and left toward the Arvet. Savold rose, stretched. The sound his shoulders made was like two stones being rolled against each other, and took the path toward the settlement's water source, where Tigo had seen him go each evening, standing at the edge and looking at the distance as if measuring it against an older shore. Haklo simply vanished into the vegetation with the soundless economy she brought to all movement through any terrain. Deka paused beside Aisha. They spoke in low voices. Deka in the modern tongue Tigo did not understand, Aiwoshi responding in the same, their exchange carrying the rhythm of two people who had established a communication channel that ran beneath the words. Deka's hand touched Aiza's shoulder briefly, then she left. Aiza looked at Tigo. Are you well? She asked, in the combine words. I am in the fifth sun, Tigo said. Aiza studied him for a moment with the expression she wore when she was determining whether a statement required further translation or was complete as delivered. She decided it was complete. She nodded, gathered Saul's medical notes from the seat beside her, and followed Dika toward the shuttle. Tigo stayed, the plaza emptied of his people. Saul remained for a time, standing at the convergence of the two white paths, her face turned toward the system's pale star, where it angled through a gap in the canopy. Then she too left, walking not toward the settlement's interior, but toward its edge, where the cultivated growth gave way to something older and less shaped. She moved without hurry. Tigo watched her until the vegetation took her, and he thought, she has been walking to that edge for a very long time. He was alone in the plaza. He sat with the stone at his back and the filtered light on his hands, and he let the reorientation settle. It was not a fast process. The 5 sons had been the architecture of his understanding for every year of his life, learned before language was fully his, carried through the Kamikak, carried into the flower war, carried into the light that took him, carried through the cell and the ship and the silence. They were not shaken by Sale's account, they were confirmed by it, and confirmation, he was discovering, required its own kind of absorption. Because when a thing you believed is shown to be true, you must then live with the truth of it, which is heavier than the belief, because the truth has edges the belief only approximated. The gods who made the 5th son did not look like Nana-Watzin. The fire they leapt into was not fire. The sacrifice that began the era was the end of an entire civilization, not the blood of gods at Teotihuacan. The mechanism was different. The scale was different. The vocabulary was different. But the shape was there. 4 endings, 1 creation from wreckage, humanity, surviving. His people had been seeing something real. They had been seeing it from inside it, with the tools they had, language, image, rhythm, the teacher's voice in the Kwikikali at dawn, and they had recorded what they saw. With the precision of people living inside the event, recording its shape through the only vocabulary available to them. That was what mythologies did. They recorded the shape of what happened, not the mechanism, and the shape endured. The afternoon light was shifting when the child appeared. Tigo had seen the child before, in the settlement's daily rhythms, moving among the Ikran and the settlement's human inhabitants with the unself-conscious ease of someone who had grown up in this place. A settlement child, small, dark-haired, brown-skinned, dressed in the settlement's simple woven fabric. The child's age was difficult to determine, young, certainly, but with the watchful bearing of a child raised in a place where watching was the primary skill. The child did not approach directly. It circled the plaza's edge, pausing at intervals, the way a bird tests the perimeter of a new clearing before committing to the center. Tigo remained still. He had been still for a long time. He was good at stillness. The flower warriors trained it. The long waiting before the engagement, the body at rest, so the body could be fully in motion when the moment came. The child settled 2 arm lengths from him, close enough to be in the same space, far enough to leave. They did not share language. Tigo knew this the way he had come to know it with everyone aboard the ship, and in this settlement, the quick assessment of whether the other person's mouth could form the sounds your mouth formed, whether the rhythm of their speech carried any of the architecture of yours. The child's mouth did not. The child's language, when the child spoke, was something Tigo had no category for. The child began to speak. It was directed at Tigo. The child's eyes were on him. The child's body was oriented toward him, but the speech had the quality of something being performed rather than communicated. A recitation, a telling. The child's voice carried a melody that was not melody, a rhythm that was not the rhythm of any song Tigo recognized, and beneath it, around it, the air changed. Tigo felt it, a pressure that was not pressure, a thickening of the space between his skin and the world, as if the air itself had become a medium for something his body could register, but his mind could not name. It was the same thing he had felt at the edge of the Ikran reunion, the 3rd channel, the one Aisha had noted, the one the Ikrin used to communicate in a register humans could sense but not decode. The child was using all three channels. Voice, posture. The child's body held a specific shape, angled and deliberate, each joint carrying information the way Tigo's hands carried information when he described the 5 suns. And the third thing, the pressure in the air. The channel that was neither sound nor sight but occupied the space between them like the vibration of a drum you could feel through the floor without hearing the strike. Tigo did not understand any of it. He listened anyway. He listened the way the Tlamatanaim had taught him to listen to the oldest songs, the ones in the archaic Nahuatl that even the priests no longer fully parsed, the ones whose meaning lived in their shape rather than their words. You did not need to decode them. You needed to receive them. The shape carried what the words could not. The child spoke for a long time. The pale star moved. The shadows of the broad-leafed canopy tracked across the white stone in their slow arc. The two-note insects called and answered and called again. Tigo sat with his back against the worn column, and the third channel pressing against his awareness like the memory of a sound heard only through bone, and he thought, the 5th sun is a stranger era than I thought. The child fell silent. The air held its new density for a moment longer, then released slowly, like water settling after a stone has been dropped into it. The child looked at Tigo with clear, dark eyes that held no expectation of a response. Then the child rose, circled the plaza's edge in the same testing pattern, and was gone into the settlement. Iguop remained. The light was failing. The two-note calls were thickening into their evening chorus, layering on top of each other, until the sound filled the shaped acoustic of the plaza, like water filling a vessel. He could feel, at the edge of his perception, the residual texture of whatever the child had been saying through the third channel, not the meaning, not the content, but the fact of it, that a communication had occurred in a register he could sense but could not read, that the world contained channels he had always been inside without knowing. I am still in it, he thought, the 5th sun, the era of movement, of earthquakes, begun by sacrifice, sustained by the cost of continuation. Full, stranger than I pictured, larger, using vocabularies I did not know existed to describe itself. It is still my era. He sat with this for a long time, in the shaped plaza, in the fading light, while the air around him held the memory of something it had carried and he had not yet learned to hear.